Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you're all doing well. If you're new here, I live full-time in my 4Runner, traveling around, taking landscape photos, making videos like this one. In the past month, or over the course of the last month, I've been shooting seascapes, almost exclusively. I've been living on the coast and only taking images by the sea. And I came into it pretty novice when it comes to shooting seascapes. I've taken a few in other countries over the course of my career, but realistically, a lot of the times I'm not shooting the sea. And in the past month, I'll admit I have not become a master at doing it, but I've learned quite a few tips and tricks that I think could be helpful for the next time you take your next seascape. So, without further ado, let's just jump into the video. So my first tip is going to be proper footwear for getting into the water. You're going to find yourself wanting to get in the water. Most of the great compositions that come with seascapes are somewhat in the water, and you don't want to be ruining your shoes or getting everything soaked. So like I said, you just watch me put some waders on, and even though those are a bit ridiculous, man, they are such a game changer for shooting seascapes. I cannot recommend them enough, but I also realize that they might not be feasible for a lot of people, especially if you're traveling and not shooting seascapes very often. Really, you just want to be able to get into the water. So if you can have some sandals that are attached to your feet that won't float away like flip-flops would, or if you have some shoes that you don't care too much about that can get wet, definitely get some of those. Just something to get into the water. Now keep in mind, if you're getting into water in Iceland or even on the Pacific coast like here, it's going to be pretty cold. So you need to be prepared for that. I definitely got in the water in Iceland and my feet did not last very long. So highly recommend something that can keep your feet warm as well. But just as long as you get in the water, oh man, it's just gonna open up so many compositions that you couldn't get before. Highly recommend, gotta have some good footwear. Very much recommend waders. You can go with neoprene, that will keep you warm if you're in cold water. You can go a little bit lighter with PVC. And then there's even breathable, I don't know what the material is, but it's breathable and not as warm as neoprene, but it's the most expensive. So definitely look into that. If you're gonna be shooting seascapes, highly recommend waders. They're a game changer. Even if you're just shooting rivers and streams and stuff like that, being able to freely get in the water and open up your world to new compositions, man, cannot recommend it enough. I've been doing it for the last week and I feel like I'm a whole different photographer. So definitely have good footwear. That's tip number one. And as you can tell, it got a bit overcast very quickly. All right, so it started raining, so I'm actually gonna head back to the car, see if it lets up, and we might have to continue this video on another day, which is a great transition into weather, which is something we're gonna talk about very shortly. Okay, well, I guess this is the most appropriate time to talk about weather, even though I was planning on talking about a little bit later in this video. Something I've learned being on the coast for a month is that the weather is completely unpredictable. And I don't mean like mountain unpredictable or non-coast unpredictable. I mean, it is almost basically useless to try to predict if you're gonna get good conditions or not on the coast. For example, if you look and it says overcast and rain all day, that's when I've gotten some of the best photos I've taken. And if you look and it says clear and not very windy, that's when some of the worst photos I've taken are. The reason that is because when you're shooting into the coast, sometimes there's going to be a marine layer that blocks the sun as it is setting. That's been happening, that happened for almost 2 weeks straight. I think I've done 4 now, scene 4. The sun has set behind this giant layer of clouds on the horizon every single time. You're not gonna be able to see it, but it went behind that marine layer like I was saying. Sun went behind giant cloud. As this light is happening, again, that marine layer showed up and is blocking the sun, but we're still getting some stuff. When I first got to the coast down at Big Sur in California, and a lot of my shots just got ruined by that. Secondly, there was no clouds for weeks. Because there was no rain or anything, it created a lot of mist or haze on the horizon that not only that marine layer was blocking, but also those things were blocking. So a lot of the times I would go shoot sunset, the conditions would be pretty garbage, even though when I looked at weather and things that would tell me, hey, this could be good conditions, it just wasn't. So a lot of the times I found that just being there and hoping that the things work out is the best you can do. I know that's terrible advice because sometimes you only have a few days and you have to plan where you're going. But a prime example is that there was a day it was literally raining while I was at the spot. I was just sitting in the car waiting to see if the rain would stop. And when it stopped raining, right during golden hour, I got this shot. And it's one of the better shots that I've taken so far in the last month. And if I had just read or predicted the weather via an app and said, oh, I'm not going to go because it's just going to be raining that whole time, I wouldn't have gotten the shot. And if I had predicted all the other spots based off of an app or weather predictions or things like that, I would have gone and just been disappointed. So if there's anything I've learned, it is just be out there ready to go. Like right now, it just stopped. Did it stop raining? It pretty much just stopped raining. I'm going to go, and maybe we're going to get something great. Maybe we're not going to get anything at all. But I have noticed that the rain really helps almost every particular condition you could want as long as it's not raining during golden hour. So what'll happen is the rain brings the clouds, which obviously creates atmosphere, but it'll also wash away all of the sea mist and all of the haze that's on the horizon that builds up over the day when there is no clouds or no rain. And that's been very important. So if anything, you should go when it's going to rain, even though you might not end up with anything if it keeps raining. So let's get back out there, see if we can get anything tonight. If not, I will continue the episode on another evening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Hope these are helpful so far. And let's get walking. All right. And just like that, the rain has stopped. So this is probably the most important tip from this entire video, and it's going to be dealing with composition. And it's something that I'm trying to get better at, is talking about composition or articulating things about ways that help you or help myself look for compositions in new areas or new experiences such as seascapes. And it's one of those things that I wish I focused and was better at, because I think a lot of people miss the mark when it comes to talking about how to improve your compositions or how to come to an area and find compositions that are unique or ones that gravitate towards you. So I'm going to try my best here, so I hope that you can follow along, and I hope that some of this stuff is useful. And you actually watched me, if you checked out last week's episode that you can find here, kind of witness me learn something as it was happening. And it was dealing with seascape compositions that looked bad until the waves hit in the right spot. And I've dealt with compositions where it's kind of like, okay, everything should line up here and then it'll work. But in this particular case, in that episode and going through it, I found a spot where I was like, okay, this rock looks bad in my composition. But as soon as the waves hit, and if I have the right shutter speed and everything is set up correctly, that rock is actually going to add a lot of motion in that area of the shot. You might find compositions that you're just not walking around and you see them. You might only find them if you wait for the right moments to see how the waves interact on that particular object or that particular spot. So keep your eyes open, but kind of try to predict how things can work rather than just trying to see them for what they are at the moment you're looking at them, if that makes any sense. I'll try to show you a few examples as I film this video. And I think for now, we're just gonna talk about composition a lot. So dig your heels in, and I hope it's helpful. Let's go find some compositions. One thing to look for in a lot of coastlines are these areas where the water comes from the land, whether it's a river or in this particular case, it's a very slow amount of water from the rain and the hills behind me. But what it does is it creates a lot of these cool textures in the foreground. And it also, if there is a river or something like that and you get lower to the ground, you can start to use this, and sometimes they'll snake back and forth and create nice elements in your composition that will create more unique foregrounds that lead your viewer's eye through the image. Pretty simple, but it's something to look for when you're walking around on beaches and stuff to see how the water is coming from the land and see how it goes into the sea. This particular composition doesn't work because of the rocks here, but it could probably work if I said I moved over here and maybe I went on more of a portrait style. Could easily work, especially with a little bit more water. Doesn't look that bad. But that's an idea. Something to watch out for are these areas that have these rivers that come out, and you'll find that those create a lot of really nice leading lines into your seascape. So I'm just going to walk you through a few of the things that pop into my head as I'm looking for compositions out here and try to give you an idea of all of the things that you could compute into trying to find a composition that might be helpful. So the first one is definitely going to be these reflections that are happening right here. That's happening because the rain happened and all this water is coming off of this hill, but it's causing such a nice reflection on the sand. And there's not any footprints here. You can actually see a little bit of the water moving right there. And that's possibly a composition where you have your horizon line in exactly the middle of the frame and you have a nice, perfect reflection using the sand. You also tell the sun is kind of poking through those clouds right there. That's just one compositional idea. Another composition idea you could have is if you come out here into the water, we can start to use some of these waves once we step in and we get into the water here. You can use some of these to create some long exposures, exactly like this. That's something that I did 2 nights ago. The tide was much higher than it was now. It was actually going all the way back there where my backpack is. And that was causing a lot of movement here in the water. And I was able to get a lot of that movement using a longer shutter speed, which is something I will talk about later, but we're still gonna focus on compositions for now. So I'm gonna try to find something to shoot and share what I find. I just wanted to briefly mention that particular thing that I was seeing, what I was doing. All right, so this is the first composition I'm trying, but you're not gonna be able to tell exactly the composition that I'm getting, specifically because you can see these waves coming in, and as those waves come in, I'm shooting a long shutter speed, roughly 3 or 4 seconds, and it's creating a nice, almost mirror-like pattern that's mirroring, that's mirroring down here and creating an absolutely gorgeous reflection on the water. All right, so this composition is one of those prime examples of one that you really can't see until you actually just sit and wait to look at the waves. Because what's happening is, as you just saw in the video that I recorded, it just looks like there's waves coming in and out and it doesn't look very good. But if you preemptively think about how those waves could look on a long shutter speed, what's gonna happen is it's gonna create a long, nice, glassy surface. There's actually a wave coming. So if you can imagine, you're just shooting an exposure right here this whole time. I'm gonna take one right now, actually. And what that's gonna do is create that nice glassy surface above this, what's called magic hat, I believe. Wizard's hat, magic hat, one of the two. And have all these nice reflections that are happening from the sky up above, right down here in our composition. Something else to note, just a quick tip, is that when you're shooting really long exposures, these are gonna move. So the first wave that comes in, your tripod is going to sink into the ground and your composition or your exposure is gonna move. So you gotta take 1, multiple exposures, 2, you gotta dedicate at least 2 different waves. So hopefully that it's built into the, or sunk into the ground by the time that second wave happens and you're taking that long exposure. All right, so another possible composition is having the sea stack on the left, and if the sun breaks through, that you can kind of see a little bit, you can see just some sun rays right there. If that breaks through as it hits the horizon, and you get a nice sunburst right there, balanced with this sea stack on the left-hand side, it could look absolutely incredible with this glossy sand that's happening down here, and it would light up all of the clouds up here. I don't think it's gonna happen. I think there's too many clouds on the horizon, but that is something to keep in mind, that when you are shooting into the sun and you want the sun in your image, use the sun to balance out the rest of your shot. So I've showed you a few images before in the video, and I use the sun as part of my balancing act in the composition to balance out the sea stacks that are also in the image. And that's something you can keep in mind, is that right now, take the sun away, this composition doesn't work. But you add the sun in and there's a perfect balance. Obviously I would be more zoomed out and it would be bigger, but that would balance out our composition by having the sun in the frame. Obviously if that happens, I'm shooting it, but I don't think it's gonna happen. I just wanted to talk about that potential shot in case it does happen. All right, so this is not my first time at this location, and something I'm noticing about this particular time again is that glossy sand and those colors in the sky. And that's kind of what I'm paying attention to, because the last time I was here, this tide was much higher up here. There was far less color in the sky, and I did not get this nice crystal look on the sand. So something that I think I really want to try to shoot if it happens is capturing all of this color in the sky, reflecting on the sand, even more than I have already, just because that's what's sticking out to me while I'm here. And maybe trying to incorporate, oh God. Whew. Even though it was probably fine, there is a decent amount of weight in it. And like I said, that tide can just make the camera sink or just take it away with it. So we got it, everything's good. So anyways, like I was saying, I'm hoping that some of these colors will keep reflecting on the water here, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. You can see a little bit of it right here where these other photographers are standing. Right here, all of these nice reflections when the tide goes back out. And it is absolutely gorgeous, and that's kind of what I try to want to make work. And hopefully all these clouds catch a little bit more color, and it turns out. So I'm gonna keep looking for compositions, keep just waiting to see what the light does and see what we get. Absolutely gorgeous evening. See, it rained and now it looks like this. I'm telling you, the rain is important for the coast. It changes everything. All right, so this was the composition I ended up settling on right before the sunset, even though it didn't poke through the clouds, just as we expected. Let me talk about it a little bit more to give you an idea. Is I'm using this little rock as a foreground piece, but it's not really, you're not really gonna see the rock in the final image. And that's balanced over here with the little wizard's hat and all this nice light on the right hand of the frame. And the sun was right there. And if it had poked through, probably a portfolio-worthy image. I do think we came away with some pretty cool images. Let me show you a little bit. So if you can imagine as the waves come in, depending on how they come in, and I'm taking about a 1 second exposure, they can create a lot of lines through the foreground of the image, considering this is probably the best representation of what my composition looks like. And if I show you on the back of the screen here what one of the images look like, it's gonna be hard to see. I might just put it up on the screen, but that gives you an idea of what that looks like as those waves come in and I take those 1 to 2 second exposures. Also, note how important these waders are, considering I can just stand out here and not have to worry about any of these waves happening or anything like that. And again, I'll point out, not to call out any of these photographers, that was me last week, not being able to get into the water. And having the freedom to get into the water is a big deal, really opens up a lot of really unique compositions. Can't recommend it enough. So I think that's probably the last of the good light. I think that's where I'm gonna end this part of the compositional talk, but we have more stuff to talk about, specifically more compositions, and we're definitely gonna talk about things like ND filters, getting your exposure longer and stuff like that. So stay tuned, thanks for watching, and I hope this is informative. All right, so as you can tell, this video is getting kind of long, so instead of trying to cut out all of that compositional talk, I'm gonna break it into 2 different videos. I do think I got pretty wordy and had a lot of examples of composition, but I thought it was a pretty good information and I really didn't want to omit any of it, although in the future what I'm going to try to do is get it down, condense it down into better tidbits of information. So let's talk about that last composition you just saw, the one with the rock and the 2 sea stacks in the frame. We're going to look at 4 different images really quick, and just to show you what I was actually shooting and to show you how important the flow of water is for your composition. In this example compared to this example, we're going to take a look at just how simple a little bit of shift of water can change how strong your composition is. In this example, the water is flowing from the rock to the right of the frame, and in this example, the water is flowing from the rock to the left of the frame. Now, in my opinion, the water flowing from the rock to the left of the frame is a much stronger composition, because that water is leading your eye through the image a little bit stronger, but it's also filling that void in the bottom left of the image just a little bit stronger than with the rock or the water flowing from the rock to the bottom right of the image. I'll let you guys decide in the comments down below which one you prefer, but this is just an example that you can take the exact same image without moving the camera and get completely stronger or completely different compositions. One question I got asked a lot while I was shooting on the coast was, is it better to take the image as the water is flowing towards me or away from me? In those first 2 examples, the water is flowing towards me, but in this example, the water is flowing away from me, I converted this one to black and white and just did some high contrast editing, and I really like the way the textures and the way that water almost looks like a blanket over the rock. Here's another example that I took probably a week prior to this video, again, as the water is flowing away from me, going over an object in the foreground. And I just think it's a prime example that you're not really gonna know until you actually get the images back on your computer, which ones are gonna work, and images where the water is flowing towards you work, and images where the water is flowing away from you also work. And realistically, it's just gonna depend on that moment, how the waves are interacting with each other. In this last example, you can actually see the water is completely engulfing that rock, but it's still having an effect on the water, having those little textures and patterns on the top of the water surface. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that no matter what, you can get a completely different image, all with the same composition when you're shooting seascapes. We have some where the water's flowing towards us, we have some with the water flowing away from us, we have some where you can't even see the object in the foreground anymore. And what you're gonna have to do is just try to envision all of those particular possibilities when shooting seascapes. And in next week's episode, we're actually gonna come back here twice more, and I finally, on the 4th visit, get the images that I'm looking for from this location. But you'll have to stay tuned and watch that next week. We're also gonna keep talking about more compositions. I'm gonna go over ND filters and stuff like that, and then lastly talk about some accessories and just some tips for when you're shooting the sea, depending on your bag or what other stuff you're gonna need while shooting seascapes. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you again next week. Hope you have a good evening, a good morning, a good night, wherever you may be, and I'll see you again, like I said, next week. Later. How's it going?
I saw you speaking into your camera. Are you doing the documentary of some type?
No, just a YouTube channel.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, about, I shoot landscape photography and I make videos about it, so.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.